Hello, everybody, and welcome to the afternoon session. We are talking about navigating cybersecurity in the automotive domain. And with me right now, I have Kayvan Karimi from Microsoft. He is the head of Global Partner Strategy and OT Cybersecurity at Microsoft, and also heading up their automotive mobility and transportation section. So I'll let Kayvan make a better introduction for himself, but I wanted to welcome him to this Device Authority talk today. And Kayvan, if you want to take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's great to meet you all virtually. My name is Kayvan Karimi. I wear two hats in Microsoft. I'm a part of the industry solutions team, and one hat is related to I'm the partner strategy lead, working with our solution managers across various pillars or solutions in automotive and mobility. And my second hat is I'm the OT cybersecurity lead for manufacturing and mobility. I'm wearing the second hat today in my presentation. As I mentioned, I'm part of Microsoft Industry Solution Organization. We provide technologies through Microsoft Azure to our partners and customers, and obviously, security and trust is a big part of it. As we go through the presentation, you'll see when we look at the topic of security, we really approach it as a holistic view that includes not only security, but identity, privacy, safety, compliance, and lastly, data governance. We're a platform for platform creators, and our CTO is very passionate about the fact that we're partner led. Um, Most of the solutions that we talk about, almost all of them actually, we have a notion called 1P plus 3P, which is our technology plus our partners' technology and services that formulates a solution that we provide to the market. Before I start the actual talk, just some baseline. We talk about connected devices, connected cars, connected factories. Connectivity means remote access, and visibility is a double-edged sword. So, if we had this talk 7 or 8 years ago, concept of cybersecurity or security for a car was a different story versus our discussions today. And there is no such a thing as an absolute security. If you give enough time and resources to the bad guys, unless 100% of the world grows conscious overnight, um, realistically, give enough time and resources to the bad guys, and any system can be broken. So it's a rat race. And it's frankly a bumpy ride. Those of you who've been around cybersecurity for a while, you need to stay ahead of the bad guys a step or two. That's fundamentally what we're doing. Now, we may be able to turn the table around, and that's again at the end of the discussion. I will get to that a bit. But as is, best you can do is stay ahead of the bad guys by a step or two. Security today is fundamentally shaping our world. It's a topic of discussion by everybody, and it is for a good reason. This is a partial sample of a download I did on June 17, a couple of days ago. It's the frequency and sophistication of the cyber crimes is growing exponentially. Part of it is because of the deep pocketed nation state bad actors that are in the table. But really, you look at it collectively, it's almost like the bad actors are overwhelming the good defenders. And the cost of cybercrime has gone out of control because of that. It is not just the enterprises. Last year, 76% of all enterprises, large enterprises, got attacked. Out of that, 65% of them were infected. And only 50% of that subset, after they paid their ransom, they got their data back. It looks bleak. And
Sorry, we can't see your presentation. You need to share your screen again.
I need to share my screen again. Okay. Okay. So it's the costs are growing, and it's not just on the enterprise side; it's also on the consumer side. Last year, again, FTC data shows that in the U.S., 8.8 billion was the cost of fraud to the consumer, which was a 30% year-over-year growth. And estimate is by 2025, we're going to have $10.5 trillion the cost of cybercrime, which uh, is indeed out of control. So far, despite the best efforts, same old same has not been working. We need a paradigm shift. It's almost like security defenders are punching bags, and you even look at the terminologies for the products that we develop, where we we're focused on incident response. We wait until someone creates an incident, we go and try to fix it. They lob another bomb at us, we receive it, then we'll go and try to fix it. Um, Really, this process of staying put and trying to build the defenses while we're getting bombarded, that paradigm needs to get shifted. So, to the discussion at hand related to the cybersecurity for automotive domain, to really get a perspective for this, we need to look at the evolution of electronic architecture of the car. There was a time, which most of the cars, by the way, on the road are that every new functionality a car engineer wanted to add, they would add a small computer called an ECU for that particular functionality. I need to add a function to roll up the windows automatically. Great, let's add an ECU for that. So over time, these ECU numbers built up, and you go back to 2000 model year 2018-19 on a particular mid-sized German sedan, and you had 137 one of these ECUs. And by the way, this caused about a couple of miles worth of copper wires to be spread inside of the cars. Costs were up, functionality was out of control, and so industry decided, hey, we're going to consolidate a bunch of these, at least the ones that are within an overall function, and get into domain controllers. So about 8 to 10 to 12 domain controllers, and still a bunch of ECUs around them. But domain controllers were multi-core processors that integrated functionalities that had proximity. So cockpit domain controller, what was that? Well, it would integrate the IVI system, the cluster instrumentation, the cabin functions, etc. And so all of those were running on a multi-core processor. But then when you do that, you look at you have from an IS 262622, which is a functional safety standard, you end up with functions that have mixed criticality, ASIL A versus B versus C, on the same single piece of silicon. So then you started focusing on type 0 hypervisors, and how do you separate and isolate these domains from each other from a functional safety perspective. But the same thing applies when you look at them from a cybersecurity perspective. You do need to separate and isolate, and you then assign a different risk factor when you're looking at protecting one VM with the different ASIL requirement versus the other. And now these are model year 2019 to 23 to 25, but the industry as a whole is moving to something called zonal architecture function, followed by a central brain which will control the whole car. As time goes by, you see the connectivity is changing. You go from hardly any of the cars were connected to most of them are connected to all of them will be connected, cloud connected. But something that's also happening is in parallel, and if you look at the ribbon at the bottom, is the first two sections are cars were being built, and if it's in the US, then it would get handed over from the OEM to the dealer. From there on, it was, for most part, out of their hand. But regulations around the corner are dictating that for model year 25 and beyond, the OEM needs to manage the life cycle of the security of the car. And that is a big mandate. Um, Challenges for securing a car versus other product, um, there is a big difference, and the complexities in automotive industry are really high. When you look at the supply chain, for example, there are thousands of suppliers across multiple tiers from around the world that feed into a car. You have just when you look at it from a processor perspective, you have up to 150 different processor types that get bundled into a car. You have thousands of different points that needs to meet from a definition and from a visibility perspective to for the supply chain to work. The volume of the code, it's car is the largest threat surface in the world. Modern car, it's you look at the model year 2019 Ford F-150 had 150 million plus lines of codes. By the time the notion of autonomous car is around the corner is talked about in the industry a lot. And you look at 2028, 29 timeframe, um, if the industry reaches, and I'm using the word if, level 4, you're looking at 300 to 350 million lines of codes coming from hundreds of suppliers in thousands of files, and most of them come in binary format. And then the car stays, you buy your cell phone and, you keep it for a couple of years, 2 years, 3 years. That's it. A car stays in the field for 10 to 20 years. And actually, if you look at the whole premise of SDV, software defined vehicle, it means you decouple software from hardware, and you can improve the features and functionalities via software, while you get to extend the life of the hardware as much as possible. So it is not a consumer business. And when you say I'm going to manage the life cycle of the security of the car, well, it means that 15 and 20 years in the field that you need to manage. And lastly, regulations. There is a concept of homologation from a functional safety perspective, IS 26262, but also cybersecurity mandates that now are showing up. Talking about the homologation on IS 26262 from a functional safety perspective, this has been around for a while, and there are guidance around it. And now we're adding the concept of security, and the same homologation is coming in from cybersecurity via UNIKEY WP29 regulations 155 and 166 specifically, but it's focused on managing the life cycle of security. First, getting a security certificate, and two, managing the life cycle of security. There are other standards from ISO SAE 21434, DIS 24089, and then executive order related to SBOM for the cars that NIST is focused on, and that's focused on managing the life cycle of that SBOM. So WP29 gets into effect starting July 2024. So by July 2024, all moving entities, and it's not just cars, in Europe, the ones that can, they have OTA software update functionality in them, which is for the most part model year 2019, 20, and beyond, they need to get a certificate that says, hey, um, I am I can manage the vehicle cyber risk. I've designed it with security in mind. I can detect and respond to security incidents, and I can provide safe and secure software updates to patch up while these cars are on the road. WP29 expands the full design and development, the production and post production with the vehicles on the road. So it looks at it fundamentally, that mandate looks at the entire life cycle of a car. It's mandated in Europe, but also it gets used in Japan and Korea and everyone else around the world who wants to sell their cars in Europe. So that bottom of the ribbon that said, hey, it is no longer, hey, you build it and then hand it off to somebody else. You now need to be focused on managing the life cycle of security. This is because of this mandate. We talked about 150 million lines of codes, but the connected car has many exploitable attack surfaces. So from the V2X or the functionality of vehicle to other vehicles to other infrastructure to pedestrian to charging stations, etc. functionality, the telematics units via cellular, the infotainment systems, which communicates via short-range connectivity with other types of devices, as well as uses types of operating systems and can bring in consumer-grade apps into the car, which all are source of vulnerabilities. And then in supply chain, it's a completely different topic, but most of the supply chain moves through Southeast Asia. So there are lots of hardware aftermarket, gray market that show up as the genuine article. And then from a software perspective, we talked about the software bill of material, these binary files that show up, which they have a ton of open source, frankly, which has been a growing source of backdoors into the software industry. In-car networks that can be hacked into the various sensors, lidars, radars, etc., that can get spoofed, and finally key fobs that it is right now one of the biggest sources of car theft in larger cities with in front of points of attraction such as restaurants, etc. There is something else is happening. It's as cars are getting connected, so cyber criminals are getting attracted to it. We've had multiple instances now that APTs, advanced persistent threat actors, which typically get funded by nation states, they have shown up and they've started attacking manufacturing facilities from OEMs. A couple of them from North Korean APTs, one additional cyber Southeast Asian APT and a Russian APT, where multiple attacks in Southeast Asia, different manufacturing facilities, and multiple known actors were behind it. So as cars are getting connected, and stakes are getting higher. Bad guys are showing up here also to extract value. Um, Typical profile of hackers are either criminals or malicious insiders. Lots of in automotive, by the way, so far we've been hearing a lot of white hats, people who are exposing the vulnerabilities to get fixed, versus the black hats. As of 2 years ago, we saw the hacks from black hats growing and overpowering the ones against the white hats. So the dynamics shifted. Typical hacker profiles also includes enthusiasts and finally hacktivists that are after a particular cause. APTs are the ones from typically funded by nation states. We changed our nomenclature. This is our periodic table at Microsoft, but we've changed our nomenclature as of the last 2 months. I haven't updated this deck yet, but we call them a little bit differently. But fundamentally, these are criminals and terrorist organizations that are funded by nation states. What that means is they have very, very deep pockets, and also they're very patient. You're dealing with uh, well-funded armies of criminals now that are at the table trying to attack. Behind those, overwhelming factors on the other industries, now we're seeing them at the table for automotive. Right now, focused on manufacturing, but once the fully connected cars are on the road, obviously you can imagine they would be at the table attacking the cars themselves. There are many common tactics. We talked about attack surfaces, but there are a variety of different tactics from man in the middle when you're communicating or updating the software to attack from different malicious apps, from mobile devices, um, key fobs, certificates. One of the biggest thing, which by the way, we're talking about with our partner Device Authority, but right now the industry is about 4 to 5 years away from quantum computing. So there is massive amount of activities by the bad guys, just grabbing as much code base as possible. I'm talking about automotive, but it's the same thing for every industry, especially older industries that they've had weaker keys or credentials. But there is massive amount of collection of code base right now happening in the industry by the malicious actors, because they're just collecting the data and they're waiting until 5 years from now when quantum computing is here, then go back and look at all the keys and credentials and see, now that you can crack them, how can you go and exploit those systems? Um, Cars are focused on mission critical applications. It's funny when you say, "Hey, I'm taking my car to the grocery store." That's a mission critical thing, but your life is depending on the safe and secure operation of that car. It is a critical part of the critical infrastructure, and it needs to be looked at the same way. If malicious actors take over any car, they can run into infrastructure, they can run into people, they can cause mass casualties, and significantly worse terrorist attacks than some of the ones that are happening now. So they are something that, um, when you look at the state of IT and the slides that I showed you, the first couple of slides about the state of affairs in the IT industry, it isn't like in the IT, everybody wakes up in the morning, all defenders on the security front, and say, "Hey, I'm waking up to do a bad job in protecting someone." No, it is really difficult. But when somebody cracks somebody else's computer or a cell phone or laptop, you're not you can't kill them. Well, in 99.9% of the time, you can't impact someone's. It's not a matter of life or death. When you take over a car, it could become a matter of life or death. So this is a mission critical application, and it's one of the most readily available um, weapons of mass destructions on the road, for the lack of a better word. Everywhere you go to, there are lots of cars. So you need to make sure that safety and security that you're enjoying today when you're driving a car, if there is an accident, 94% of the time is a bad judgment by the driver. It stays that way or it gets better, but nobody externally, especially remotely, is causing anything bad to happen. That's why this is so important. The way we look at cybersecurity and safety for the car at Microsoft is we look at the whole life cycle of security. Secure by design and detail SBOM analysis when you're designing the electronic architecture of the car. In fact, when you look at the building block of the car, it's fundamentally composed of two pieces. One is that 150 million plus lines of codes and underlying hardware processors that run that code, and then it's fundamentally the architecture. And so a combination of the SBOM building blocks and the electronic architecture and the different components with an IDPS system are the two pieces that you're most concerned with. Then once the car is designed, you'll hand it off to the shop floor for production. But that security posture that you have at the end of your design needs to be kept intact as you're going through a manufacturing process. And then finally, it goes in the field and you collect data, you try to monetize data if you look at the future of the car, and it gets monitored by a security operations center. But the life cycle of security starts from the birth, from the design, and it continues over the course of 15 to 20 years of operations in the field. So you need to put mechanisms in place that addresses the safety and security of the car through the entire process. As a critical infrastructure, same um, same approaches that you look at other critical infrastructure needs to be applied. Same philosophies. This is NIST framework from a security development lifecycle management, but it's for critical infrastructure. And so if you've listened to Microsoft and actually a lot of other players in the market, the notion of the zero trust is big. Nothing different here, but also defense in depth. The defense in depth. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's sort of imagine the moats, imagine the castles in Europe. That you had a moat system and you had a drawbridge and you had the doors and then there was an inner courtyard. So if somebody breached the moat and they got to the door, there are guys who are pouring oil. And if they breached that door and got into the courtyard, there are people, archers that they are hitting so that you can go and fix the first two layers while they're busy with the third layer. And that very much applies based on the electronic architectures of the car and the processor architectures and the different VMs involved, defense in depth. Secure by default. And again, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but there is no difference when from a security topologies that are listed here when you're talking about IT or OT. The difference is the context from a use case perspective and the context related to that particular entity in architecture, but fundamentally the topologies are the same. And the same thing that applies from critical infrastructure in IT applies for critical infrastructure in OT. So, from an end to end system, we talked about design and development, production, and then field operations. Same picture in a little bit different way, but in a way that we can now um, look at the different pieces. A lot of time when I talk to my friends in the defenders on the IT side of the house, they feel a bit intimidated by the OT cybersecurity. Um, Fundamentally, if you look at this picture, you have assets that needs to be secured. Once the telemetry signal are available related to that particular asset, whether it's a car or whether it's a factory on the edge of the factory or on the gateway in a car or at the enterprise. Then from there on, they go through the network. Yeah, there are nuances related to context, but the rest of the system is the same. Rest of the system. The rest of the topologies are the same as the rest of the system. So if you look at it from a car perspective, once you've done the right thing related to change your posture in an optimum format from that SBOM that we talked about, once you've identified the vulnerabilities, once you've kept track of all the CVEs, lower level CVEs that are there inside of that code base, that then you're going to track them in the future in case that lower level CVE all of a sudden, because of the changes into a particular stack, it goes from level 3 to a level 8 or something. Once you have that, and you have an IDPS system in place that monitors the anomalies related to, you name it, behavior, messaging, anything, that telemetry signal exists, then it travels through the network that you need to secure, the vehicle backend, and because of the nature of that car, it's every single car would need to be treated as an individual. So you got hundreds of millions of cars on the road. Those are every single one of them individually need to get tracked and need to get updated and need to get patched up. And so you will, the back end, vehicle back end, you have a digital twin of it, and you do anomaly detection. And now, if a processor breaks down in a car for whatever reason, memory has gone bad. Is it a function of some cybersecurity attack, or is it because the component has gone bad? So you see what I'm saying? You're tracking it for one reason, but it could be easily applicable for other applications. It's the same thing when you're doing anomaly detection for cybersecurity purposes. You can also look at it from maintenance perspective. And so that digital twin of the car, then it's communicating and being monitored by a SOC, a vehicle SOC. And at the scene level, you look at the logs, and then at the SOAR level, you look at additional information, which we'll get into it in a little bit. But so if you separate these pieces, you realize that from an OT perspective, it's the factory and the car that you need to monitor. And there are a variety of different tools and technologies that through Microsoft and our partners are available provide that information and provide that security and functional safety that's needed. And then as it travels through the rest of the system, from a security perspective, again, there are a variety of existing infrastructure, existing security tools, existing operations that can be leveraged to manage that life cycle of OT cybersecurity. So finally, all the way on the right hand side of that diagram was the Security Operations Center. That's where now you have your Security Operations Center. But imagine you're a transportation company, and yep, you're an enterprise, so you have your workforce and you have an existing IT security that you're focused on and you're working with. That's up and running. Trends, by the way, for that side of it is the costs are killing CISOs, and everybody is looking at a way to better manage, a way to lower down the costs and actually be effective against the threat actors. Then on the manufacturing side of it, if you're a tier one, chances are you got 100, 150, 200 different factories. And then finally, now you have to manage the life cycle of the security for the cars. You don't want to end up with, you know, hundreds of SOCs. Certainly, consolidation across the tools for use the majority of the tools that you have on your IT side to for your OT operations. There is no reason for you not to do that. In fact, probably 80% plus um, on the manufacturing side, 85% plus are identical. You can use them, provided it's the right set of tools and you're providing you're approaching it from not siloed tools all over the map. It's an integrated end-to-end system, which we provide along with our partners. So minimal gaps and overlaps, and then you can extend it to OT manufacturing and plants, and finally from the SOC operation perspective, from to VSOC. And so it's the trend is that yes, you have to manage multiple SOCs, and initially you're keeping them separately because they have different class of assets. They have different risk profiles, need different security assurances, different levels of liabilities. But down the road, you try to consolidate as much of them as possible. When you go from a C, well, to a SOAR level where you do posture management and security incident response, and you do a higher level analysis, one of the things that you bring into the table is threat intelligence. That's the gold mine for looking at the big picture from a security operations center perspective. And I will revisit this in a little bit, but um, there is one way of turning this whole thing around, turning the table on the bad guys. And that fundamentally is through integrated systems that communicate with each other and get informed by large threat intelligence on what's around the corner, what's happening on other parts of the world. Next thing is from an automotive perspective is so far we've only been talking about cybersecurity. I mentioned a more holistic approach needed on chart number one. But if you look at the future of automotive, it's all about data. It's about the data state and data sharing, and frankly, monetizing that data in various ways. And so every single car company is looking at a variety of things that they can do, leveraging that data that gets generated. And I don't mean just what's inside of the cabin. I'm talking about from the entire car. And so when we talk about security, a holistic approach says you need to really look at functional safety and security first and foremost, because they go hand in hand, and the different levels of criticality would need different types of treatment from a cybersecurity perspective. And the market is evolving, and so you need to pay attention to it. Then you need to look at it from that data state that we talked about. You need from a data management, governance, visibility, and protecting the sensitive data. And you need to look at identity and privacy. It's a they if you From an identity management perspective and credential management, and we talked about these bad actors that right now are collecting all of that information, and they're waiting for quantum computing to come to life, and so go back and hack. You look at a you know model year 20, 28, 29, that level 3.5 to level 4 autonomous car, you're looking at 25, somewhere between 2,500 to 3,000 credentials and certificates and keys that need to get managed. And so paying attention when you're talking about a car that's going to be on the road for that 15 to 20 years, it's a good hygiene factor to look at the whole notion of data and identity and privacy and compliance and safety and security collectively at the same time. A holistic approach to it as opposed to piecemeal. So far we've talked about the complexities, what's behind the complexities related to automotive cybersecurity, how that complexity came about from the evolution of electronic architecture of the car. Why is it that we need mission critical cybersecurity? Because people's lives depended on it, versus what's happening today in the consumer and enterprise market from security perspective, and how, unfortunately, in the news sphere, it seems like the bad guys are overwhelming the good guys. Truly, we need to shift the paradigm so we're not the punching bags anymore. I'm going to focus on that a bit based on an announcement that we had at Microsoft a couple of months ago. Everybody knows about um, ChatGPT and OpenAI, and everyone knows about Microsoft applying these co-pilots to the variety of products that we have. One of those products is the product called Security Copilot. And Security Copilot, I'm here telling you guys, that is going to become the fundamental factor behind that paradigm shift that we're talking about. Today, everything we do in cybersecurity is reactive, and we need to change that and move from reactive to proactive, and hopefully in the future, predictive. So, our approach to cybersecurity protection is an adversary centric approach to threat intelligence, which means at any given time, our defenders at Microsoft, our 8,000 or so professionals, are tracking over 300 unique threat actors, 160 nation state actors, and 50 ransomware groups. Those numbers are actually higher right now. This is it's unfortunate, but also ironic that every time we develop a chart, within 2 months of it, we need to change that. But those numbers are higher. What that means with the nation state actors being in place means you now have much, much deeper pockets at the table, much, much more army of patient bad guys that are at the table invested in cracking into organizations. And so, while the last 5 years, we at Microsoft we spent 5 billion on cybersecurity. Our CEO made the commitment that, and we're in line with spending 20 billion going forward. When you have serious money sitting at the table, thinking about ways to defeat our defenders, you need to have serious money at the table spending to protect not just us. Cybersecurity is a team sport. We look at it as all of us good guys are in the same camp, and we need to make sure we have the right tools for our customers and partners to defend the world we live in. One of the unique things that we have in Microsoft is we have a very unparalleled view of the ever changing threat landscape because Microsoft products are so pervasive and used in so many different things. We have a unique perch. We defend four of the world's largest public clouds. We protect over 2.5 billion endpoints, and we graph the entire internet. So I want you to pay attention to the number on the most left-hand side, the security signals, the threat signals. And we receive, and that number again, when I said it's unfortunate, it's that number is much higher now, but nevertheless, we receive 65 trillion security signals, threat signals every day. It's 3x larger than a particular nations with massive security apparatus. So it is a huge footprint of threat signals and threat intelligence that we receive on a regular basis. And so, why not leverage that data scale, at scale, that the footprint that we have, and the threat intel that feeds, by the way, the signals coming from it feed our threat intelligence, and hand that over to AI, our security co-pilot, for incident response, so our AI engine can respond at machine speed. And when you do that, then over time, when you know the security posture for an entity and you've received this signal today, you correlate the two and say, based on the particular building blocks I have here, the particular knowledge of this product or this system, and what just happened in a particular part of the world for a particular threat, this particular device that I'm protecting most likely will be a candidate down the road. So let me go and proactively patch it up before anyone thinks about coming and attacking me. So turn this equation around. No more punching bag. Turn it around and now proactively go and defend yourself, as opposed to wait for the bomb to get lobbed at you and then go and do post incidents response. Security Copilot, for one thing, we actually looked at it as you look around the world on a worldwide basis, we have a gap of 3.5 million defenders in cybersecurity industry. In the US, we have about 1 million defenders and about 700,000, 680 some thousand open jobs for cybersecurity defenders. So how can we address that talent gap, and for the defenders that we have, make him significantly more effective and more efficient? It's the first and only generative AI security product that builds on our version of OpenAI ChatGPT 4.0. that defends organizations proactively at speed and scale. It continuously learns from that 65 trillion signals per day. One of the things that I need to mention is um, when you deal with Microsoft, trust is at the heart of our work with our customers and partners. Your data is always your data, and it's always within your control. We are not using your data as a part of the training for the foundation of the AI models. It's protected by the most comprehensive enterprise compliance and security controls. So this is not about using your data or leveraging your data. No, this uses the threat signals from elsewhere, but uses the knowledge of your product and skills that are needed to protect you, to defend you proactively. So it's always learning. It's augmenting humans and machines. I looked at it's been a couple of months. I've actually looked at a handful of use cases, and some of the things that in my past lives I was familiar with. That once an incident would happen, and you get all your first level defenders, and then you bring in all the security analysts and your red team, blue team, etc. Everybody comes together, and you got a handful of or two handful of people working sometimes for days to come up with post-mortem, and you end up with a huge list of things to do. Um, when you look at the demos on Security Copilot, you see it. Things that used to take those days or weeks take seconds. I think the longest demo that I saw was about 30 seconds. 23 seconds was 18 to 20 some seconds was most common. And not only that, instead of ending up with a huge list of things to do and that all of that noise, it comes back and actually gives you literally step number one, work on this. This is what was breached and fix that. And it goes to a very clean list. So the very few defenders that you have efficiently can go and address what actually needs to get fixed. So TI, or threat intelligence, feeds AI, and AI scales and responds in real time. And so it enables a real paradigm shift to move from a reactive to a proactive, and hopefully in the future predictive um, security defense. It's in private preview, but we're integrating it with all families of our products, and that's it. Thank you very much. If there are questions, I think this is the time for the Q&A. I'm gonna stop sharing. Any questions? And I believe the questions were supposed to come in the chat. So let me go in the chat. Anything?